Greetings, salutations, and good now. Kevis Major here, doing it major, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're gonna be talking about Friday the 13th because today's Friday the 13th. You know what I'm saying? So happy Friday the 13th to everybody tuning into this video. Now, let's dive straight into it. So Friday the 13th, we start with Friday. So when you think about Friday, we start thinking about the days of the week, and then Friday being the last day of the week, keyword last day of the week, you know what I'm saying? So it's the end of something and the beginning of something. And so when something ends, there's usually, humans create like a celebration or a ritual or a burial, you know what I'm saying? So Friday, we start in the weekend, so we want to celebrate, so it's like a ritual. A lot of people, when you even think about yourself, what do you do on a Friday? Some people like to, go out with friends, socialize, maybe some drinking is involved, maybe some smoking, maybe dancing, and, even sometimes, intimacy, you feel me? So, maybe you want to leave all of that for Friday and going into the weekend. You got the weekend and stuff. So, long and short, Friday is, ushering in the weekend. So, it's like a celebration, it's a ritual. And, it's kind of like in society, it's almost like that day of the week. You know what I'm saying? We're going to celebrate the weekend. So, celebration, ritual. When we dive deeper into even how these planets, not planets, but these days got the names from the planets and the Norse mythology going all the way back, you know what I'm saying? Friday is associated with Venus, and so when we look at Venus is the planet of beauty, love, fertility, you know compromise, how far you would go to attract the things that you want in your life, so is it there of like attraction and beauty and fertility, intimacy, enjoyment, entertainment, right? And so you have that day ritual, and then you put the 13. Now we gotta go to the 13. So you see we're break on Friday, right? Now we're gonna break on the 13th. Now in tarot, right? We're gonna start with tarot because there's many ways to look at, the world, right? Many different objectives and angles and perspectives to look at the world. And so when it comes to the 13th, no, the 13th deals with, in tarot, it deals with death, which is basically transformation, rebirth, renewal, or just profound change in some way, shape, or form. So that's 13, like, and deal with it. That's 13 in a nutshell, like death, transformation, renewal, change, in a symbolic essence, in a symbolic sense. But then you could further break down 13 into numerology, like you break down the 1 and the 3. 1 plus 3 give 4, and so 4 represents something different on a lower octane to 13. 13, there's more numerals, and so there's some additional oomph to the 13 that make it different from 4. But 4 deals with stability, structure, formation, organization, strength, practical, being grounded, discipline, order, organization, and all of those earthy type energies. In some civilizations, even when I was in Taiwan, in Asia, number 4 is seen as unlucky, in a certain type of way. And so that we know that numbers carry certain energies, and when you put them together, they carry even more energy or symbolism, because here on the island we're living in St. Kitts, Friday the 13th, also has some superstition behind it, you know what I'm saying? So we're just trying to debunk it or understand it, and so we could use it because it's all over, you know what I'm saying? And so we could use it or transmute it in a way that is beneficial for us, right? historically, if you dive into history and look for Friday the 13th, like the origins, and so you'll date you back to, 1300, when some king, some French king, Philip the Fourth or something, arrested some Knight Templars. And so, that day was solidified as, the day that the Knight Templars was arrested. But using dates as energetic signatures or sigils is actually a psychological tactical system, and it's called symbolic anchoring. Some people call it semiotics. It's also known as sigil magic, and so that's where a certain date or sigil or sign or name, it could be a certain color, anything that people really put this energy into is linked with an emotion, a emotional state or memory. And so exposure to, the word Friday the 13th, could activate certain shared knowledge or memories or experiences, shared consensus or understanding, and trigger a certain emotional state and memory, right? And so, there's a lot of energy condensed into these symbols and dates. Another one is like 9/11, right? When you say 9/11, people don't, you ain't even thinking 911. You're thinking about plane crashing into a building, if you're a certain age, right? Even 911, when you think about the number 911, you think about emergencies. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting how that's all linked together. But the long and short of it is, Friday the 13th is one of those symbolic anchorings, or one of those sigil, example of sigil magic, where a lot of energy is condensed into a date. So you think it's something scary, you think it's something spooky, you think it's something to be scared of, or it's a bad lucky day, And the more energy that we add into it without understanding it, so we could use it, how we want to, then you can just be on the negative side of the energy. For example, let's say, you're some sort of business person, you into astrology, a tarot, or whatever. Like, you understanding Friday the 13th and you understanding people's understanding of it, then you could be able to, position yourself to be profitable, or, just have a bit more motion during times like Friday the 13th, just because you understand it, and some people didn't understand it, so they're looking at it spooky dooky, and other people just rubbing back their hands, capitalizing off all of this reactionary energy. Anyway, I was going to dive into some astrology, but this video get a bit long-winded. I guess the long and short of it is that Friday the 13th ain't really nothing spooky. However, forces and, we as a collective already condensed a lot of energy into it. And so it's just about either one, totally ignoring it, which is hard to do because, you're following the Gregorian calendar. So it must know it's Friday the 13th. So you can't really ignore it. But you could try to ignore it, or two, just try to transmute it, use it for your benefit and not for your detriment. And so, how can you use it for your benefit then? Well, you already know that Friday is the day of, is an initiation, a ritual for the weekend. So one, you could not participate into it, or if you do, then you do it knowing that, hey, this is a Venus day, this is about attraction, beauty, intimacy, positive energy, and so you exude that type of energy. And then 13th is transformation, so you want to try to transform the way how you practice your Venus energy, and let that be the ritual. You put an end to, a particular ritual or celebration that you used to do on Friday the 13th, or use Friday the 13th as a catalyst to make a certain change, and maybe we'll break down that in part 2, because there's some astrology that goes behind today specific for the 13th. And so again, 13, you could look at it two ways, which really comes back down to looking at it in a complete way, which is transformation, which is rebirth, which is profound change. And this profound change is ushering in a new level of stability, structure, foundational strength, practicalism, grounding energy, discipline, organization, and all of those type of earthy energies. That's crucial to thrive, you know what I'm saying, and the realm that we're living in. And so, again, you got to understand these things. We need to understand these things so we could use them, and it's not using us. Anyway, major farewell until we meet or greet again. You already know it's Kevin's major. We're gonna come back for part 2 and break down the astrology, even though we already, halfway through the day, midday. Alright, doing it major.